item is heard and prior to the committee taking any action on said items. Those who would like to provide public comment will be limited to 3 minutes unless in the discretion of the committee circumstances require a longer period. Members of the public will not be permitted to yield their allotted time to other members of the public to make comments. Individuals may appear before the committee to discuss items not on today's agenda. However, the committee may not discuss or take action on these items except to decide whether to place the matter on the agenda of a future meeting. Please be aware that this meeting is being recorded. Please turn off or silence all cell phones. We will now take roll call.
Good morning, Ms. Cruz.
Present.
Raphael Sweet is present.
All right, quorum is established. Moving to the next page. All right. Let's move to agenda item number 2, review of October 4th committee meeting minutes. Are there any questions or comments or changes even to the October 4th meeting minutes?
I do not have any.
I was like, there's only 2 on this committee. I do not either.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
All right, I second. Moderator, please open up this agenda item to the public for public comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am opening up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to make a comment, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and submit it to all panelists. Or you may simply raise your hand. If you've called into the meeting, you can press *3 to raise your hand. We are displaying instructions and we'll give you a moment. All right, I see no request for comment at this time. Madam Chair, shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please go ahead.
All right.
And I'm going to ask Mr. Sweet to call roll for the vote on the motion.
Ms. Cruz?
Yes.
Raphael Sweet, yes.
And I forget, there's a specific phrase to say once it's approved. Or
motion carries.
Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Motion carries. All right, we can move on to agenda item number 3. I'll ask Ms. Walker to provide an update on the board's administration program.
Sure, yes, thank you. And good morning to the committee. So this morning, I'm going to provide a brief update on the administration program. Relatively brief this morning, as we did just meet about 60 days ago. Since that last meeting, we've really continued our focus on enhancements to the Connect licensing and enforcement system. In early October, we simplified the renewal process for the Doctor of Chiropractic license by removing the prior CE upload section from the renewal application and instead replacing it with the same certification question that can be found on the paper renewal form. And through this change, licensees can now renew online in just a few minutes, and they can file their renewal application prior to completing their CE before their license expiration date. Because that was one challenge that we were finding with licensees, is that by requiring that they provide proof of all of their CE at the time of renewal, if they are at the beginning of December and they'd like to file the renewal and they've got their CE scheduled within the next weekend or 2, they were precluded from accessing the system until after all of their CE was in place, which left them in a position where they had just days to get their license renewal submitted online in some circumstances. So we've made some improvements to that process and shortened the amount of time that licensees have to spend in the system in order to take care of that business function. We also updated the renewal process for the satellite certificates, and we put the renewal button prominently on the user dashboard. Previously, we had functionality in there that to get to that portion of the renewal, you had to first renew the DC license online, but we removed that contingency and just placed it as a separate section that could be directly accessed because we were finding that some people were submitting the paper application for the DC license, and then they wanted to do the satellite certificates, and they couldn't get there because the paper application hadn't been processed yet. So we're trying to kind of better serve our users and make it easier for them to just complete their whichever transaction they want when they get into the system and not make it too complex. So for our next software release, it's currently planned for mid-January of 2023. And with that, we plan to fully implement cashiering in the system for all of our business processes, which is really that portion of the functionality is what's driving that mid-January timeline. They're still working on developing some of that in the system, and then we're going to have to go through some extensive testing to make sure it works. But through that release, we're also working to make the user dashboards easier and more intuitive to navigate, also with a list of our resources and contact information prominently displayed on the dashboard. And then we're going to provide the ability for licensees to store their CE records in the system. We've also been working on our documentation for the CE provider and course approval processes in the system. And that's been a pretty extensive effort as we've been looking for strategies to where we can be able to implement not only our current CE process, but also the more updated and refined process that the CE committee is currently envisioning and working on. So we've been working closely with the department's Office of Information Services, and we think we've identified a few different strategies we can take to where we can implement something that would ideally work now, but also work in the system or in the future with minimal system changes at that time. So that's at this phase, we're still working on the documentation, but we expect development of those functions to begin in early 2023. Are there any questions from the committee on our progress on the Connect project?
I have a question.
Sure.
So question, I wasn't sure. I know we're going to get to legislative updates kind of in a bit, but I know with SB 1234, this is specifically one where there is like updates to the definition of active duty. Does the kind of upcoming updates reflect changes to that?
They don't need to. We reviewed our processes, and it's that with those changes there, that legislation just affects how we interpret and how we actually apply it to them. Yeah, so we're all.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was like a specific thing that someone had to self-select, but okay, it's more internal process. Perfect. And then also, let me see here. My question on, I think I had mentioned to you kind of separately before about kind of external user acceptance testing, or just kind of get those, I guess another term for that would be kind of not super users, but kind of early adopters, right? From kind of, but I know kind of we talked about how there's kind of been a focus on kind of what is opportunities for kind of even internal review. Is something like kind of an early adopter opportunity kind of something we would consider for kind of the future releases, not necessarily right now because a lot of things are in motion, but after our discussion, I did discuss that concept with the department and also with the Office of Information Services. The only real hurdle is security concerns, but they did like the idea. So we're trying to identify some strategies to make that work. I think initially one way that we can do it is they're not fully external users, but trying to pull different members from the department that aren't familiar with our processes to act as an external user with just some very basic instructions of what they would be expected to know, so that we at least get someone outside of the BCE staff devoted to the testing. Perfect. All right. Thanks so much. Appreciate that.
Sure.
And I think that's it for this section. Thank you.
I didn't have any further questions. Thank you for that.
Okay. The other major item that staff's been working on since the last meeting has been related to the board's strategic plan. So as you recall, at the October 27th meeting, the board adopted its 2022 through 2026 strategic plan. And the next major step was for staff to complete the action plan and identify the specific tasks that staff is going to take to implement each of the objectives within the plan. So to accomplish this, staff did participate in 2 action planning sessions with the department's Solid Training and Planning Solutions on November 29th and 30th. And we have a final session that's scheduled for this afternoon. So the final action plan will be presented to this committee at the next meeting, along with some updates on our progress toward meeting some of the objectives within the plan. as part of the committee's general strategic plan oversight activities. Are there any updates on the or any questions on the strategic plan?
Not for me. I see that you guys are doing a lot of work, and I saw some of the updates in the drafts that were submitted in the material, so I appreciate that work.
Thank you.
And none for me.
Okay, thank you. And then within the meeting, in the update in the meeting materials, under our regulations, we currently have about 9 pending regulatory proposals. There's a few more once CPEI is cleanly broken out into separate proposals. But what staff's really been doing is we've been meeting with regulatory counsel to work on prioritizing these various proposals and discuss strategies for us to effectively move them forward in 2023. And we've also been developing and working on the rulemaking calendar for next year. Within the packet, there's now those 9 updates or regulatory proposals, if you will. The first of which is now being branded as the annual continuing education requirements for licensees and continuing education course approval process. This was previously a smaller package meant to implement the distance learning format, and based on the discussion at the prior board meeting, the continuing education committee's actually made some pretty significant progress towards outlining the full structure for the annual continuing education requirement. So that's been incorporated into this idea of the proposal of the first phase, which is to implement a new annual CE requirement for licensees, and then also develop the continuing education approval process, as well as a new reapproval process for existing or for previously approved courses. So the committee began its discussions on proposed language on Friday, December 2nd at their meeting, and they'll be returning to this topic again at their January 4th, 2023 meeting. Also worth highlighting in there is we have the approval of chiropractic schools and educational requirements. This regulatory proposal is really meant to align the curriculum standards with those identified by the Council on Chiropractic Education. This file is being developed by staff. There may be some additional changes that need to be made, and if so, those will be brought forward to the licensing committee for review and discussion in 2023. We also have what was previously branded as the CPR requirement package, but it would be a proposal to implement either basic life support certification or CPR certification for all licensees as a condition of licensure in active status. So staff is currently working on this proposal and plans to present it to the licensing committee, or I'm sorry, the continuing education committee as early as the January 4th meeting. Also within there's a few more CE requirements. So one of them is CE exemptions and reduction of requirements. The board discussed this at the April meeting. And after that, when we've repurposed some of the other packages, and specifically the one that is moving forward for CE, we've separated this out now into a new, what would likely be a new section for the board to identify criteria where a hardship exemption to CE could be granted to a licensee, either in circumstances such as a natural disaster or a state of emergency, or any other more personal circumstances that might be appropriate and discussed by the committee. We also have the CE committee has also been talking about or discussing the approval process for a CE provider, as well as kind of rethinking the appeal process for denial of CE courses and providership. So this one is being held back slightly so that we can make progress on the other more urgent proposals relating to CE. But these comprehensive discussions would occur after we move forward with the other 3 proposals identified by the CE committee. So I know that's quite a few relating to CE. Are there any questions from the committee on the progress with CE and those regulatory proposals?
I have one question on the exemptions and reductions of requirements. For that one, I'm sure we're clearly aligning with kind of definitions of natural disaster and declared state of emergency. Is staff, because when I think of that, I think I used to oversee a 401k program in a past life. And so kind of there was a lot of definitions around that. So I wasn't sure if kind of staff is aligning, if there's existing, I would say, definition, and I may have asked this before, if there's existing definitions or with other boards that we can clearly align to, or if this is kind of something where we're just trying to find best practices in general.
So with that proposal, yeah, we're aligning the definition of natural disaster and state of emergency with existing language. I believe it's from the government code. So it's already in statute. And then within the pending regulations, we're just pointing to where it's previously defined in statute. And then what we've done since the board's last discussion on the item is this was initially envisioned to be part of 364, which in the board's current structure, it outlines either reduction of the CE requirements or flat out exemptions. And in the proposal now that the CE committee is working on, 364 is being redesigned to simply identify circumstances where all licensees that meet that criteria are automatically exempt from CE, such as if you have an inactive license or if you're on active duty in the military. And then we would carve out this separate section, like 364.1, where it identifies the criteria for if you're granting a specific exemption due to a hardship or individual circumstances.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was focused on, like kind of, I would say hardship is definitely defined in interesting ways across different industries. So just wanted to see. Thank you.
Yeah.
As to the Council on Chiropractic Education and aligning our metrics with them, what I'm not as familiar with them. Are they a national organization?
So that's the accrediting body for the Doctor of Chiropractic degree program, and the board had previously approved language to eliminate a lot of the regulations that are currently the prescriptive requirements for chiropractic colleges, and instead require that they just meet the standards of the Council on Chiropractic Education. So we're reviewing that and developing the rulemaking package based on the language that was previously approved, but we may hit a few policy questions that are going to have to be returned back to the licensing committee for discussion.
Okay. Do you recall when that was? How long ago was that decision made?
That decision was made in July of 2020.
Okay, that's what I didn't recall. I think that was before my time, so that's why I was curious.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, that's with one of what we've discussed with legal counsel is in many cases, a lot of these regulatory proposals have been pending for such a long time that many of the actual board members that comprise our current board weren't present when the decisions were made. So in many cases, unfortunately, we are going to have to bring language forward again for reapproval by the board, even if we're not making changes, just due to the fact that the board that approved it isn't the same sitting board that we currently have.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Sure.
And real quickly, I
Sure.
think that would be a good point to make in the next board meeting as well. So I feel like there's been questions, I would say, kind of every now and then around around kind of trying to refamiliarize ourselves and trying to remember were we there or not. But so I think that would be kind of helpful to bring up the next board meeting, since we definitely are going to have a fair amount of these to go through with them.
Yeah, at the next board meeting, in addition to kind of this running list that we have right now of the regulatory proposals, we'll have the CPEI better organized into more specific packages. At one point, we split it into six different parts, so we'll have it split into that, so that as part of the update, we can identify different timeframes, but then also really bring to the board's attention just the volume of proposals that'll likely be going through committee and then the board next year.
Oh, that's awesome. I personally really appreciate that.
Okay. We have moving on to some of the other proposals, we do have the delegation of authority to the assistant executive officer and then some modifications to the citation programs. So this is a package that is complete as far as the work that we need done from the board. The language has been approved and we're just documenting it and finalizing the rulemaking package so we can submit it to DCA for review and approval. So we plan to get that wrapped up by the end of this year. Another one that the enforcement committee is working on, actually the next the final three proposals within the meeting materials. The first is the disciplinary guidelines and uniform standards for substance abusing licensees. With this one, at the enforcement committee meeting in October, the enforcement committee reviewed some updates to the standard and optional terms and conditions of probation and provided some feedback to staff. The board in the past has previously made a decision on the trigger point for implementing the uniform standards for substance abusing licensees. So that leaves us with the final point that needs to be, or portion of that package or language that needs to be completed, is for the board to, or for the committee to finalize the different guidelines themselves and how they apply to the different statutes and regulations that are basis for discipline. So that's kind of an extensive effort, because you have to come up with the justification and the reasoning behind each and every set of standard terms, both the minimum and the maximum. So staff is working on that, and we do plan to bring that forward to the enforcement committee, if not in spring, definitely by the end of this fiscal year. We also have the proposals related to CPEI. So that's where it initially began as a proposal to add or amend 12 different sections of the board's regulations. Last year, the package itself was separated into 6 different proposals grouped by topic area. And through our review of the language itself, we have found that although it started out as an enforcement proposal, there are at least 2 pieces of those regulations that would belong with licensing committee. And I think it would more effectively move forward if we divided them out, so that we had enforcement committee work on the ones that are very specific to enforcement, but then the ones that actually are addressing licensing issues, we would bring those forward to the licensing committee next year. And then the last one that we currently have pending is to update the record keeping requirements for chiropractic patient records. And this one's actually even tied to a strategic plan objective to get this done. So in this case, this is something that the enforcement committee is working on. They've designated Dr. Paris as kind of a subject matter expert to assist staff with the technical language that's going to go into regulation. So this is something that we're developing the proposal, and we plan to bring it back to the enforcement committee at their spring 2023 meeting. So I know that's a lot, but are there any additional questions about some of our pending regulatory proposals?
I have one for the disciplinary guidelines for uniform standard substance abuse. Specifically, I know that there's a new employment, and I'm not sure if it applies to us, because for the most part, folks own their own businesses, or at least a fair amount of ours, but I imagine it may apply. There's, separate from a lot of this is, I know AB 2188 it looks likely won't be effective until 2024, but I know that is, it was supposed to be 23, but now it's 24. But that was the one, it's around kind of employment law around cannabis use. So I know, what's it called? I imagine that's probably on your staff's radar when it comes to this as well. I wanted to highlight it.
Yeah, I know. I appreciate you highlighting it. We've been following the different laws and how they affect licensing, and that one actually wasn't brought to our attention as something that would affect this, but I will look into it further and report back to the committee as well as enforcement.
That was my only question.
Okay, thank you.
And I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then at this time, if I could ask the moderator to display the budget fund condition handout that we have for today's meeting on the screen.
Thank you. We have it loaded. It just needs to be toggled too. So if the co-moderator could grab it, or else I can make myself, there we go.
Okay. And then for every user on the line, you should have the ability to scroll this fund condition update that's being presented on the screen. Let me just navigate here. So overall, looking at our fund condition, not much has changed since the update at the October board meeting. Our revenue projections that are included in this handout here are almost identical to what was presented in October, with the exception of the surplus money investments line where the budget office made a few slight adjustments just based on their metrics that they use for coming up with those numbers. The key takeaway here with this fund condition that we're viewing is it includes our actuals for the prior fiscal year, and it also includes projections through based on our fiscal month 3. So we're not too far. We're only looking at 1 quarter of the year of actual numbers plus their projections for the rest of this current fiscal year. But the key takeaway here is that overall, looking at the bottom of the lines where it's got our fund balance, overall we're stable, but we're still seeing that the months in reserve is declining, not increasing. And that's one based on the fact that they're projecting that we spend our entire budget. And historically, we've not spent the entire budget with the exception of the prior fiscal year. So one key thing for us to be reviewing and closely monitoring this fiscal year is our expenses, and particularly our expenses at the Attorney General's office, because that's generally the area where we typically in the past have not spent our full allotment, but this prior fiscal year we did. So that's one item that we're closely monitoring to see if we're going to expend all of those funds this fiscal year, or if we're going to be able to revert funds back to our account. The other item to note with this projection that's been prepared is that this is assuming that we make no payments towards our outstanding loan to the Bureau of Automotive Repair, and we do need to be in a position where we start making those payments, if not this fiscal year, by next fiscal year. So what our plan is for this fiscal year is we're working closely with the budget office, and this spring we're going to assess our current fund condition to determine if a payment can be made this fiscal year, and if not, we're going to build it in for next fiscal year and determine how we can begin making those payments. The other thing that needs to be closely tracked this fiscal year is the CE Committee's discussions about the changes to the CE course approval process and the related fees, as that may necessitate other changes to our current fee levels. So right now, the CE Committee is discussing a proposal for changing the course approval process and moving to a 3-year approval period, and then also implementing a reapproval process at potentially a lower fee. So what we're going to need to be doing is, in addition to determining the appropriate fee amounts for those new proposals that they're working on, we're going to have to assess the impact and ensure that we have adequate funding in our other areas. We may need to make adjustments as necessary. So it's something that at this point we're closely monitoring, but we did want to bring to this committee's attention as it relates to our budget. And also looking a little bit further out, a little bit after this fiscal year has been completed, and looking into maybe late 2023 is when this committee will be working closely with staff to begin studying our fee structure and developing and discussing potential recommendations for the required report to the legislature in 2026 on our fee structure. So are there any questions from the committee on our budget?
I had a question on, you mentioned the spending on, I guess you call it the enforcement budget, or what, do you know why we spent all of that budget recently but not in previous years?
For 2 main reasons. One of the reasons was with COVID, we had a number of referrals that went to the Attorney General's office, but they weren't scheduled for hearing due to some delays with the Office of Administrative Hearings and moving to the video conference platform. And then in many cases, respondents were requesting extensions and they were being granted by the Office of Administrative Hearings. So during that fiscal year, we had a number of cases that were adjudicated that went to hearing, and they resulted in significant expenses at the Attorney General's office. So that was the major cause. The other cause was we did have a significant number of pending cases that had been developed and been investigated by staff for a number of years that went to the Attorney General's office, and those referrals, or that increase in referrals, also increased the budget in that line item. So both of those kind of compounded together, and it put us well over what we typically would spend in 1 year at the Attorney General's office.
Okay, and then we're trying to figure out whether we see that happening going forward or not.
Correct. We don't expect the sustained levels of hearings that we experienced in the prior year, but the only real issue that we're still facing is that the Attorney General's office did increase their hourly billing rate recently. So that has had effects when we look at our historical averages. Once we factor in what they're now charging us, there is a significant increase.
And just generally, am I correct that the previous iteration of the budget in general showed the months in reserve going down a little bit more quickly, or am I misremembering that?
You're correct. This one gives has a better picture, and it's based on two reasons. The first of which is at the top, the very top left. They have the prior year adjustment after they calculated our fiscal year 21-22. They had an adjustment of an additional $200,000, and then they've also refined some of their estimates as they've gotten a little bit more data. So with their estimated expenditures down in the resources section, those are slightly lower than what was initially presented at the board meeting.
Okay. And I imagine it also reflects kind of the updated fee schedule, or at least our assumptions around the updated fee schedule as well.
It does, correct. That's why when we look at this current fiscal year with those fee schedules going into effect January 1st, we do see a modest increase in revenue between the prior fiscal year and this one. And then we see the more significant and sustained level of about 4.97 million in the future fiscal years, where assuming that fiscal year you receive all at that new fee level.
Thank you.
And Kristen, I think you and I, we had talked about, what's it called, also before, a little bit about, not for today's meeting, but like in general for the kind of future meetings, of not only kind of getting a view of the fund condition itself, but also kind of the budget as well. So I know this, looks like I'm not sure kind of at what level kind of what's it called would be shared, but just I think we've discussed it before that this kind of document is specific to the fund condition and right versus kind of more of the operational budget in terms of right. So it's kind of like we're walking two lines when reviewing this document.
That's correct. Yeah, they're currently working on the governor's budget, so there's a lot of the details behind the numbers that can't be shared at this point, but they'll be public in early January. So at the next committee meeting is when we plan, especially when we're having the specific fund condition and fee structure discussions, that we pull back some of the numbers and look at more specific line items. And then at the board meeting, to kind of assist the members in reviewing this document, we'll also put a more high-level snapshot that like the key takeaways that can be presented to the board.
Great, thank you for kind of working towards that.
Yeah.
Oh, just one more question on the loan balance. So I know you mentioned that we're looking at being able to make a payment on that soon. Do we have any sort of deadline as to, I missed it, maybe did you say the deadline of when we have to start paying that down?
There's no hard deadline on it because it's a interdepartment loan, but we do accrue nominal interest on it every year. And the goal within that one of the goals is looking at the balance of about 1.4 million is to get to a period where we can start issuing $250,000 annual repayments to that loan. So that's what we're going to plan to try to build in and hopefully pay it off within 6 fiscal years.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. And if there aren't any additional questions, that concludes my update.
Do we need, Ms. Cruz, did you want to move on to the next agenda item, or do we need to take any action on any of these things that the executive officer presented?
Oh, no. Sorry, my computer was acting up, but nope, we can move on to the next agenda item. See here.
This
Did
is
you want to do, oh, sorry, this is Sabina. Did you want to do public comment on this item?
Thank you so much. Yes, so let's go ahead and do public comment on this item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm opening up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to make a comment on agenda item 3, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists, or you may simply raise your hand. We are displaying instructions and we'll give you a moment. All right, I see no requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please do.
Okay, it's closed.
All right, and now we can move on to agenda item number 4, which is update on discussion on new issues and recommendations from the board's 2022 sunset review. Ms. Walker, can you please provide an update?
Sure. So the purpose of this agenda item is really a check-in on the board's progress in addressing the new issues that were identified during the 2022 sunset review process. So as part of the sunset review process, the board submitted the sunset review report to the legislature and then received a background paper ahead of the sunset hearing where staff of the Assembly and Senate BNP committees had identified some specific issues and recommendations for the board. Those were discussed during the hearing before the Joint Sunset Review Committee, and then the board issued initial responses to those different issues as part in April through the sunset process. But where we go from there is planning for the next sunset review report. The board is going to, within that report, be required to respond to these issues again and document any progress or any additional recommendations that we have on the various issues. So really the purpose of this agenda item today, and then also at least on an annual basis, is to have the committee review and track the progress of the board in addressing each of the issues so that when we prepare our next sunset report in late 2025, we've identified and addressed each of the issues, and we have substantive updates to provide to the legislature. So with that, I'll just jump right into what some of the different issues and some updates. So the first issue had to do with the board's composition. And this issue, we've assigned it to the Government and Public Affairs Committee. At this time, the board doesn't have an official position on the issue, and it wasn't assigned a specific strategic plan objective. So where staff will take it from here is that we're going to gather some information on the composition of the other DCA healing arts boards, as well as the different chiropractic boards in other states, as some of them do have or they are multidisciplinary boards, and some are strictly chiropractic boards. And we're going to present that information to the committee for review and discussion at a future meeting, likely in mid to late 2023. The second issue identified within Sunset Review had to do with regulations. We've assigned this issue specifically to me, and it's also been identified as a strategic plan objective to increase the efficiency in our rulemaking processes, to move pending regulatory packages forward, prevent a backlog, and improve staff and board effectiveness. So to do that, we're working closely with our legal counsel to identify strategies to move these proposals forward. And then also we are implementing some new training requirements for staff at or above the associate governmental program analyst level for specific training on regulations so that they can assist in these efforts. So we'll continue reporting that to the committee and the board on our progress, but that one is tied to a specific strategic plan objective. Issue number 3 had to do with what the status of BCE's strategic plan was. And with this one, I don't believe any further action is necessary from the board at this time. The board did adopt an updated strategic plan in October. Staff's participated with solid in planning sessions. We're going to complete our final one this afternoon, and this committee is going to continue providing oversight over our progress in meeting those objectives. So there's no specific tasks I would say that are needed as it relates to issue number 3, aside from the oversight activities will already be occurring. And then in 2025, we'll document that information in the response to this issue. The fourth issue had to do with the board's fund condition and fees. This naturally is assigned to the Government Public Affairs Committee, and it also became a strategic plan objective to continue to monitor the license fee structure to ensure the board's financial stability, maintain access to services, and to determine whether the board needs to consider plans for restructuring its fees. So as you're aware, Senate Bill 1434 does implement a new fee schedule for the board effective January 1st, and staff will be working closely with this committee to monitor the impact on the board's fund, and as well, staff will be working with the committee for developing that required report to the legislature. Issue number 5 related to fee increases and barriers to licensure for chiropractic professionals. This issue is not reflected in the strategic plan, but is an action item for the licensing committee. So the board, through the new fee structure, the board is actually slightly reducing the cost of initial licensure for both new applicants and applicants through reciprocity. But in addition, the licensing committee does need to discuss various barriers to licensure and help develop a response to this issue for the legislature. Issue number 6 relates to reciprocal license requirements. And this one is specifically also tied to a strategic plan objective to review reciprocity requirements to minimize barriers to licensure in California. So this issue has been assigned to the licensing committee. It's actually going to begin its very initial discussion on the issue this Friday, December 9th at the licensing committee meeting. And then in 2023, staff is going to be researching and compiling very detailed information on chiropractic licensure in other states, as well as the requirements for reciprocity with the other DCA healing arts boards. And that information is going to be compiled and presented to the committee for consideration at a future meeting in 2023. Issue number 7 relates to CE, and that one as well became a strategic plan objective to complete the comprehensive updates to the board's continuing education program and regulations to provide clarity and accessibility to ensure continuing licensee competency and public protection. So the Continuing Education Committee has made some substantial progress in their regulatory proposals for updating the annual CE license requirements, as well as the approval process for courses. And then in addition, another issue that was identified by the legislature had to do with the auditing and the high non-compliance rate by licensees. So staff will be resuming audits of licensees' continuing education course records this month, beginning with those that renewed in the quarter of July through September of 2022. And we'll be providing regular updates to the committee on the compliance rate, any other observations from the audit process. Issue number 8 related to the performance-based assessment of licensee competency. This issue as well has been assigned to the Continuing Education Committee. And at this point, staff needs to research some similar competency assessments by other boards and develop some recommendations and items for discussion by the committee. The committee did discuss not moving to a performance-based assessment, but they have discussed some other activities that qualify for continuing education credit to help expand, but we do need to provide additional support to the committee so they can discuss this issue at a future meeting. Issue number 9 related to enforcement timeframes, and that one also was assigned a strategic plan objective to streamline our internal enforcement processes and standards, including complaint intake, investigations, and case management activities to increase efficiency and ensure timely action. So the enforcement unit did participate in a project with the department's Organizational Improvement Office to evaluate the complaint intake, desk investigation, and field investigation processes to identify some strategies to reduce our timeframes. And these recommendations will be implemented throughout this current fiscal year. And then in addition, we'll be developing some other updates to our processes that we think would further kind of enhance these efforts, and we'll be reporting on those to the enforcement committee throughout this year and next. Issue number 10 related to practice violations. This one is not included in the strategic plan. As always, we continue to encourage those to report any misinformation in the profession to the enforcement unit so we can take appropriate action. We've continued to track any actions related to this issue. We have had quite a drop in the number of complaints compared to looking at last year and even in 2020. We are also closely monitoring the other boards that were affected by legislation. Our response to the legislature was that we had the appropriate enforcement tools and we didn't think we needed anything additional, but we'll continue to assess that so that we can respond in 2025. Issue number 11 related to enforcement disclosures and if there's any additional measures that can be taken to ensure consumers are aware of licensees who are on probation. So with this item, staff will be developing some recommendations of additional measures that we can take to ensure that the public is aware of licensees who are on probation. Those will be presented to the enforcement committee for discussion as a separate agenda item. Number 12 was the impacts of the COVID pandemic. This is something that is going to need to go before this committee for discussion at a future meeting. It hasn't been formally discussed. There were updates provided at various board meetings on waivers that were issued by the department, but really taking a retrospective look and then developing future recommendations is something that this committee is going to need to work with staff to work on and present that in our report. And same with issue number 13, if there's any technical changes to language that may improve the effectiveness of BCE's operations. At the time of responding to the initial sunset issues, we didn't have any to offer. If there's any that do happen to come up, those will be discussed and brought forward to this committee so that we can develop that portion of the recommendation to the legislature. So that's a brief overview of the 13 different issues. Are there any specific questions from the committee on any of those issues or the status?
I have a question on, let's circle back here. Starting, just I think there are 2 or 3 here. Issue number 5. This is kind of specifically around fee increases and barriers to chiropractic professionals. Because it's a focus and issue around, I would say, access, at least a portion of it. I know kind of in working with the licensing committee, I was in my brief moment, my brief time on the licensing committee, we were kind of reviewing some documentation around kind of equity measures, or at least from, I forget what document it was, but have we considered reaching out to different chiropractic schools to see how they're approaching, right? Or getting input from them of how they're approaching, I would say, any potential barriers or how they're either approaching or tracking or addressing. Because I feel like that's an opportunity for us to, I would say, kind of not kind of recreate the wheel, but kind of to see kind of what's happening already out there.
Correct. Yeah, that's one aspect that we considered for addressing that issue. Another item we'd like to look at is not only there's the barriers to joining the chiropractic profession, but then potential barriers just based on location and access to the services. So in addition to kind of studying, it'd be helpful, and I think it'd be worthwhile for us to study, work with the colleges to get some of the data, but then study where do the grads go, and especially where do our new licensees go. And we've got access to a lot more information than we used to in the past through the use of the department's QBERT system. So we can try to study and get some more data based on location. And I think we could report a lot of that back, not only to the committee, but to the legislature relating to this issue.
Yeah, and I imagine in general, the data would be very interesting because it's kind of like when I think of, I would say, just thinking of the Sacramento region in general, there's talk about how do we keep local knowledge here. I imagine it's kind of similar for us, thinking of just California in general. How do we keep our folks here? And then my next one is on issue number 10, around kind of the spread of misinformation. Are we, and maybe you mentioned a little bit, are we working? I imagine we're already working with other, I would say, similar boards that have kind of, I would say, similar issues around the topic of misinformation.
Correct. Yeah, we're closely monitoring the other board's implementation of the medical misinformation bill. What's unique with the approach there is they were mandated in the bill with granting that as unprofessional conduct and to take action. From what we've found for the cases that we've investigated, we felt that we already had appropriate authority, just given the board's regulations are very broad as they relate to unprofessional conduct. So we're not only tracking their implementation of the bill, there's quite a few lawsuits going on as well with that bill. So we're closely monitoring that, and then we're closely monitoring what we're receiving in terms of complaints. And they have significantly decreased, but we will, as we have enforcement resources, also try to be proactive and identify any cases and take any appropriate actions.
Thank you. And then my last thing is, I would say, well, two last things is, I was wondering if, I know that in a number of these you've already, it's already shows the different kind of timelines and dates. And so I would say if there's any way we, what's it called? Even if it's pending or even if it's kind of in a quartile, I'm not sure if this is going to feature document or not, but just a way for us to see, I know it's in the current status, but for us to see kind of if this is like something that requires our attention now. A lot of these say it's a 2023 thing. So it's just, I want to make sure kind of when we review these documents, we know what requires more immediate attention we need to pay attention to now versus something we know that's going to come, I want to say like in the second half of 23. So it's kind of helps us gauge where, I would say, level of focus.
Sure. Yeah. As we, so a lot of these are tied to the strategic plan objectives, and they do have they have staff timelines in the action plans, which are yet to be released. But I think we can definitely add that to future updates as we work with each of the committee chairs as they plan out their work for 2023. None of the issues identified here in the Sunset Report are something that require immediate action by the board, but they do require progress over the next 3 years.
And then my last thing is I appreciate, I would say, the level of in-depth information that is not only provided in the update, but I know this is a lot, so thank you.
And I don't have any further questions.
Thank you. So that concludes my update on the Sunset Review new issues. There's no action needed by the committee. It's purely an update item. So we could, if the chair would like to call, we can call it for public comment.
All right, let's go ahead and take it to public comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm opening up the Q&A panel, and if any member of the public would like to make a comment on agenda item 4, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and send it to all panelists, or you may simply raise your hand. I do see we have a request for comment, and just a reminder, we have a 3-minute time limit. So calling user 2, you should be able to unmute yourself. There you go, you're unmuted.
Hi, thank you for the platform. I have a question regarding issue number 2 of the Sunset Review. There's an item about approval of chiropractic schools and educational requirements for section 330, 331.16. Later this week, at the licensing committee, there will be an item for discussion about a rule change in the rules of regulation for chiropractic colleges as it pertains to requirements for interns at the student clinic. Does this item in the review need to be addressed prior to the approval of what will be discussed at the licensing committee on Friday? Or, well, does this need to be approved before that could be approved, or can that be approved without the approval of this item in the Sunset Review? That's all.
This is Sabina. Kristen, did you want to address that real quick? Or?
Sure, yeah, I can briefly respond to that. To respond to that person's comment, no, so the Sunset Review process, they identified the need for the board to make its rulemaking process more efficient. And this document here is outlining our different pending regulatory proposals and the board's response and progress on moving them forward. So it's in no way contingent or holding up the discussion on the approval of chiropractic schools or the progress of any regulatory proposal. It's a response item for the legislature. And thank you for your question.
All right, and this is the moderator. I see no further requests for comment. Madam Chair, shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please do.
Okay, it's closed.
Thank you. Moving, and actually I want to say thank you also for the public comment as well. Moving on to item number 5, review and discussion of possible recommendations regarding onboarding process for new board members. And I will kind of pass it over to Ms. Walker.
Thank you. So as the committee likely recalls, at the October meeting, the committee discussed various improvements that could be made to our current onboarding process for new board members, including providing an initial meet and greet with the member separate from the formal orientation session, and then also assigning an existing board member to act as a mentor to the new board member and answer any questions about just the different roles and responsibilities of being a board member. And then also making that meet and greet and the orientation session more flexible, where it can be conducted either virtually or in person, just depending on the needs and scheduling requirements of the new member. And then also making sure that we're providing a real comprehensive binder of materials on the board's functions, committees, roles, pertinent laws and regulations, and other just parties that are involved with the board to the new member to help support them as they currently join the board. So what we have in the committee meeting materials, and I'll provide a brief update on, is we've tried to outline here a potential process for the new board member orientation and onboarding process, beginning with establishing that during the first week of appointment, the EO would place the introductory call to the new member, explain the oath of office completion requirement, confirm that they're available to participate in the next scheduled board meeting, inform them that they'll be receiving a welcome package from staff, and then schedule the initial meet and greet session with the EO and the board chair. Also during that first week, the board liaison, who's been identified as our point of contact, the staff person that'll be facilitating all of our board duties and also communicating directly with the board members. That board liaison is going to ship and email a welcome package consisting of a letter from the board chair, all of the mandatory paperwork and training information, and what we'd like to brand as the board member resource binder to the new member. Then within 2 weeks, the EO would host that initial meet and greet session with the new member, and the participants would be the board chair, the EO, the assistant executive officer, and the board liaison. And then after introductions, the group could discuss the new member's goals and interests. And then based on that information and following the meet and greet session, the board chair could then identify a current board member that could act as a mentor to the new member. And then the board chair can also identify any appropriate committee assignments for the new member. Within that time frame as well, the EO and the board liaison would be available to assist the new member with any questions about their mandatory onboarding paperwork. We'd be ensuring that all deadlines are met and submit those completed forms to the department's Office of Human Resources and the Board and Bureau Relations Office. And then within that same time frame, we'd be working to coordinate and schedule an orientation session with the new member, and then also encouraging them to sign up for the department's board member orientation training that's offered by the Department of Consumer Affairs. Looking a little bit further out, the goal, what we've identified as maybe a time frame of 30 to 45 days, have the EO conduct the orientation session with the new member, either at the board's office or via video conference, whichever method is more convenient for the new member. Participants in this session would include the EO, the assistant executive officer, the board liaison, the board's legal counsel, and then the board member who's serving as the mentor if they happen to be available to participate. And then before the new members' first board meeting, this is an idea that staff came up with that we'd like to hear from the committee if you support it or we could pull it off. But have before the first board meeting, the new member is going to attend, have the EO schedule a meeting with them, and then also the mentor to help review and discuss the meeting agenda and materials and be available to answer any questions that new member may have prior to their first meeting. And then looking further out on an as needed but no less than annual basis, the board liaison would distribute a copy of any new or updated policies, procedures, or guidance documents to the board for inclusion in their board member resource binder. And then the documents would also be posted in a shared folder for electronic access by the board members. So that's kind of what we've identified as potentially an initial framework for what that process would look like. What our next steps would involve from staff is actually fully developing that new board member resource binder. The binder that we had in the past was really a compilation of just a variety of different materials, but we would benefit from really developing a more comprehensive overview of all of the different processes and including that in the binder with the existing materials as tabs or appendices that can be referred to, but just having some flow charts and some explanations of the board's different processes. So we'd like to work on developing that, really filling out and completing that welcome package and working with the chair to draft an introductory letter, and then also developing the orientation training materials. So with that, it's really an update at this point on our progress, and then looking for any feedback or discussion by the committee on this process that's identified here.
I'll say I think that's a really really good outline of what I think the a future board member could use. So I appreciate your work on this. And I was curious, is there a specific position for a board liaison, or do we have that?
So what we have currently is our policy analyst position, and they're under our update of the staff duties, they're going to be rebranded as likely the lead administrative analyst, and they'll be tasked with being the board liaison as well.
Okay, got it. No, I think this is a great framework that we have here. So yeah, it really will come down to, I think, the implementation and scheduling all these things when a new board member does come on board. I think that, that's when the challenges may arise, but hopefully not. Hopefully everything would go smoothly. But I think this looks great. Thank you for your work on it.
I do have a couple, and I love this just because I'm very much an administrative nerd in that way. So a couple of, I counted 5 things. So content-wise, I know it's not a today thing, but content-wise, some things I would definitely be interested in reviewing. I would say would just be in general the contents of the binder. What kind of, I would say the outline of the structured orientation of the kinds of things it'll cover, but also even mentor responsibilities, right? Just kind of what do we, at a high level, what do we expect of that particular mentor, especially in that kind of first year or so of kind of being that mentor. So there's that part. Number 2, see, a section actually, so 2 sections I'd like to see considered is kind of a more administrative section around training and reporting time, because I recall those, for at least for me in my experience, those were kind of emails coming through. So that would be I would say very helpful for someone new, as well as similar to how you have a before new members first board meeting. I imagine something similar for before new members first mail vote as well. Right, how to interpret it, what are your responsibilities? If I check this, what am I really holding up? Right, as well as first before section for the board members' first committee meeting as well, kind of what to anticipate there. So that was that part. And next is I'd say a clarification of during the proposed changes to onboarding and orientation process. When we say during the first week, within 2 weeks, I'm making the assumption, and this is me being extremely literal. I imagine it's not additive. It's just truly within 2 weeks of the appointment date, right? Or within 30 to 45 days of the appointment date.
Correct. Yeah, that's the intention there. Not adding on them, but within all of those timeframes within the date of appointment.
Okay. All right. Perfect. And I know date of appointment gets a little weird because you have to do the oath of office documentation, right? So kind of the grace, there's a little bit of grace there. And what is my last question? And then this is just kind of, I would say, not a new thing. I feel like something that's been brought up before, but kind of the potential of an online portal, right? Or something to that effect, specifically for board members. What's it called? I know, I imagine content comes first because you're going to have to populate it with something. So a lot of the focus is going to be there, but I would love to see kind of something in the next kind of year or so around that. Right. And yeah, and I love it. I would say the level of thoughtfulness that went into this. So thank you.
Sure. Yeah, and from here, we do want to develop additional materials, and we will be presenting them to this committee for kind of review and feedback. So prior to implementation, with the new board member resource manual or binder, that's something that we'd like to work with this committee to get it right, and then also at that point, once we've finalized it, issue it out to all of the existing board members as well. And I do appreciate your comments and feedback, as we can add the mentor responsibilities and implement some of these additional ideas and work on the training. And we've also there's been discussion as far as making it electronic, a few different platforms. So we can continue exploring that, because there's the possibility of using SharePoint. We do have our existing box drive that we've used for committee meeting materials in the past. And we've brought it up as part of the Connect project, but I'm not sure if it's feasible just with our resources. But that's another option, is to use Connect as the platform for us to share, which that would open up the most flexibility, because then we could even potentially build on that and get to the point of electronic mail votes. So we'll continue kind of having those discussions with the department and seeing what's feasible, and we'll report back to the committee.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I don't have any other questions. I know I asked a ton. Anything else on your side, Mr. Sweet?
Not at this time.
Okay. All right. And then just a clarification question. Does this item require a motion, or is it just informational?
At this point, it's informational and just a status update. So no motion is needed, but you could call for public comment.
All right, perfect. Thank you. All right, let's go ahead and move to public comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm opening up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment on agenda item 5, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and submit it to all panelists, or you may simply raise your hand. We are displaying instructions. All right, I see no requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
Okay, it's closed.
All right, let's go ahead and move to agenda item number 6, review, discussion, and possible recommendation regarding proposed updates to the board member administrative procedure manual. And I will go ahead and kind of hand it over to Ms. Walker.
Okay, thank you. So within the meeting materials, staff has made some technical updates to the board member procedure manual just to reflect changes to the board's mission statement, board composition, and the standing committees. These changes are indicated either through underline or strikeout in the manual within the meeting materials. As far as today's committee meeting, we're asking that the committee discuss those changes and whether any additional changes may be necessary to some of the policies that are within the manual, and whether those would warrant any further discussion or consideration. One item from the staff recommendation is, let me just navigate to it. It is would be on page, apologies. have to scroll here. On page 10, at the very top of page 10, there's a board member attendance at board and committee meetings policy, where it's outlining in extraordinary circumstances how the chair may excuse a board member from the obligation. From the staff recommendation would be whether that policy it could be considered to be updated to reflect circumstances where when a meeting is scheduled with, say, maybe less than 30 days notice. In many cases, when we have an urgent need to hold a meeting, whether it's due to litigation or a pending disciplinary decision, it happened quite a bit in 2022, more than we'd like to, where we've had to schedule meetings on short notice. And in many cases, we'll then poll the members. And the goal there is for us to get a quorum, and we can't necessarily find a date where everyone's available. So those who are unable to attend could be considered excused. So it may be beneficial to officially put that in the procedure manual so that someone who, for one reason or another isn't able to participate in those short meeting notices isn't looked upon detrimentally as not meeting this policy. So maybe that could be carved out a little bit further. But beyond that, we're really just presenting it for the committee if there's anything of interest for updating. At this point, it's just whether any policies should be discussed and brought back to the committee, because we're not looking for a recommendation today, because within this manual also includes the onboarding process. We want to get that complete and then implement the updates into this procedure manual. But if there's anything else that the committee would like to see staff bring back, additional information, or if you'd like to discuss here today, that's why we placed it here on the agenda.
So just to clarify, what's it called? No specific action, but any recommendations are taken at this point.
Correct. Yeah, we've outlined within the manual itself, we made a few just technical updates, just purely to reflect the current composition we have of the board. The committee could discuss today whether or not you agree that any additional changes might be appropriate for the attendance policy, just to reflect those circumstances where we schedule on short notice, just to have a quorum of the board. And if there's any other policies that you may read in that manual that you'd like additional clarification on, that would be appropriate here as well.
Perfect. And actually, you touched on one area, kind of the same thing, top of page 10, around attendance. So seeing as though we have our committees are two-person committees, so what happens with and this is a clarifying question, what happens with when one person is not able to attend? I imagine is no longer a quorum.
Correct. Yeah. We wouldn't schedule a committee meeting with just one person that could attend. We have had to schedule committee meetings where only 2 of the 3 members could attend. And then frequently is the board meetings where we, once we have our quorum of 4, even if the 5th or 6th member, it didn't work for their schedule, sometimes we have to just schedule it, otherwise we can't take any action.
No, that's fair. Just wanted to make sure, just because, the 2 committees I'm on has 2, so I'm like, so what happens? Okay, thank you. Let me see here. There's a section towards the bottom of page 10, also clarifying question. Meeting notices, agenda items for board meetings, and I'm making the assumption it's also the reference of notice of meetings is also the same for committee meetings as well.
That's correct.
Okay, making sure. Sorry. I made sure to circle all my sections. Disciplinary cases. Another question actually on page 11 for the whole disciplinary cases for board meetings. Impacts time. I don't know what my questions there was, but it was around timelines, but I think that's okay. Oh, I remember my question now. So for the hold for discussion items, I know it's, are these normally shared with other board members to let us know when an item is being held, or do we just find out kind of in the upcoming board meeting where can we discuss that item?
In the past, it's brought to the board's attention at the time of the board meeting that this item that everyone else voted on has been held. I think there's an opportunity there for us to communicate that at the time that it's held, and then also in in the meeting materials. And that also actually brought up one item that could be clarified within this section is that the process for holding the disciplinary cases is that with the way staff processes them, there's the deadline, and after there's a quorum, sometimes if a member doesn't vote and that deadline has passed, and we usually have a grace period of another week, staff will proceed with the decision. So if someone it doesn't submit their vote timely and they want to hold it, sometimes it won't actually be held. So we could probably clarify that if it's not clear enough in the procedure.
I imagine I would say even just because the time span between board meetings, I imagine there's opportunity even within a committee meeting if something is specific to a committee, a topic is specific to a committee, if folks, that there may be opportunity for pre-discussion leading into the upcoming board meeting to kind of get through some initial discussion. If I'm not sure if that's would be something for consideration.
We haven't done that in the past with disciplinary cases. Just given that our committees don't go into closed session, but there is the opportunity for any policy issues that get identified. Those could go through committee discussion rather than going directly to the full board.
Yeah, because I know one of the selections there is kind of, I'm not sure if, there are a couple times where it is the feedback or the concern is policy related. So I think there's opportunity there. And actually one thing, and I'm probably going to, wasn't sure if there was a section, I feel like there's a section here on receiving the board ID, right? I just remembered my note from the prior section, sorry, the prior agenda item of that there wasn't mention of when they would receive their board ID. So sorry that I wrote the note in the wrong section. And I think that's it for me. Anything in your eyes, Mr. Sweet?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I'm in favor of what Ms. Walker discussed as far as not penalizing people if they aren't able to show up at a meeting on short notice. I mean, I know that we all make an effort to do that. I don't think it's been an issue to date. So I don't think, I think we all make the effort to be at the meetings if at all possible. So I don't think we should be punished if there are things that happen on short notice. And hopefully there won't be too many of those instances anyway. But I agree with that recommendation.
Actually, I do have one more thing, sorry. And this is me kind of looking through at the very beginning, kind of looking just at the manual itself in the introduction section. I think it would be really great if we would include the mission, vision, and values, or at minimum mission and vision in that section. And also I would say early reference to the Chiropractic Act as well, kind of as you kind of start reading into the document, it just says the act. And I remember when I first came on the board and I was reading through the manual, I'm like, which one? I don't know which one. And I learned that later in the document, but I would say just from someone kind of brand new, especially someone, I would say a public member of the board, brand new walking in, I would say those clarifications would be helpful up front.
Okay, great. We'll incorporate all of the committee's feedback and discussion into the draft, as well as the discussion items relating to the onboarding process, and we'll bring this back at a future meeting.
Oh, talking on mute. Seeing as though there's no action required, we can take it to public comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm opening up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment on agenda item 6, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists, or you may simply raise your hand. We are displaying instructions and we'll give you a moment. All right, I see no requests for comment at this time. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
Okay, it's closed.
All right, let's go ahead and look to agenda item number 7, public comment for items not on agenda. Ms. Walker, was there any written comments that we received ahead of time?
No, we didn't receive any written comments for today's meeting.
All right. Do we want to kind of open it back up for public comment then? All right, let's do that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to make a comment on items not on the agenda, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, or simply raise your hand. For call-in users, you can raise your hand by pressing *3. We'll give you a moment. All right, I see no requests for comment at this time. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
Okay.
All right. Now let's jump over to agenda item number 8, future agenda items. Opening this up for discussion, by Mr. Sweet and I. Are there any agenda items that we'd like to see in the future?
I don't have any to propose at this moment.
Thank you. Or do I? And let's go ahead and put it out for public comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm opening up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment on future agenda items, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and submit it to all panelists, or simply raise your hand. We'll give you a moment. All right, I see no requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Thanks so much. And we can jump over to agenda item number 9, scheduling 2023 committee meetings. So, all right, Mr. Sweet, let's get our calendars out. Let me see, I'm going to open this item for any questions for discussion on the committee scheduling for Government and Public Affairs Committee meetings in the spring, summer, and fall of 2023. So question to Ms. Walker. So is this where we go ahead and just plot our calendars and start kind of identifying some dates, or?
Correct. Yeah, we found it pretty beneficial when we did this last time. And then, so if you and Mr. Sweet could identify some dates that would work for future meetings in 2023. The recommendation for the spring meeting is to try to hold it. We need a minimum of 10 days, but we'd like at least 3 weeks ahead of the April board meeting. But it would be beneficial if that meeting was held in mid to late March or very early April, just so that we can allow for the new legislative proposals to be discussed by the committee and then have it be, current, because as it's frequently amended.
Okay. All right. Let me know when you have your calendar up, Mr. Sweet. I will kind of be honest, my preference is going to be Mondays, if that's possible.
Mondays work for me as well. I could do the 13th or the 20th.
Actually, let's do the 13th.
That quite adequate time, Ms. Walker?
That would be perfect.
Okay. And any particular time you prefer?
I think the 11 a.m. time works.
Yeah, that works for me well too. Let's do that. And actually, we'll take the same approach. Is there a window of weeks that would work best for the next session, Ms. Walker?
We've got the meeting July 20th. So if we look mid to late June, always works well, because it gives staff adequate time between meetings to prepare for the next one, and then also be able to carry that information forward to the next board meeting. So I would say mid to late June.
How's your
12th? There's 26th.
Oh, you said 12th or 26th. Let me see here. Let's do the 12th.
11 a.m. again?
Yep, let's save that time slot. That's good. And then what works best for fall, Ms. Walker?
I think if we stick with those same timeframes, that'll give us good time in between to develop materials. So I would look again at mid to late September, if that works for the committee schedule.
Trying to see what day is the holiday. I'm guessing the holiday's on the 4th. No, not the 4th.
So the 18th or the 25th?
Let's do 25th.
– 11 a.m.
Perfect. All right.
Show that the 25th is Yom Kippur. I don't know if that matters.
Oh yeah, let's change that.
I don't know if that.
What was the other day that works well for you?
18th.
Yeah, let's do 18th. And 11 a.m. there as well.
Okay.
Okay. And I think, and it was only 3 committee meetings for next year that we were to schedule, or should we also look at December? We might as well look at December while we're here.
Yeah, we might as well. We could do one for December as well.
So I imagine the first half of December would be ideal, but considering holidays.
Yeah, the 4th or the 11th, maybe.
Yeah, let's do the 4th. At 11 a.m. All right, so I have the March 16, June 12, October 18, and December 4th, all at 11 a.m. All right.
Got it.
And so for this item, I guess we can go ahead and ask the moderator to open up this item for public comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm opening up the Q. If any member of the public would like to comment on agenda item 9, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, submit it to all panelists, or simply raise your hand. We'll give you a moment. All right, I see no requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
Okay, it's closed.
All right, moving on to agenda item number 10, which is adjournment.
Excuse me, Ms. Cruz, before we move on, I just wanted to confirm, for the spring meeting, it's March 13th, a Monday, 2023.
Oh shoot, was it 13th? I did say 16th, didn't I?
I wrote down 13th also.
Sorry about that. March, correct, that is March 13th.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Right. Now we can move on to agenda item number 10, which is adjournment. So I want to say thank you to everyone kind of on staff that put all this information together. Incredibly informative. We know it's a lot to pull. So wanted to make sure I say thank you. And so I go ahead and adjourn this meeting. The time is 12:29.